sweet. Oh, nice. I can see my slides. Okay. Hi, my name is Kolson. If we haven't gotten the chance to meet before, everything that Philip said is true. Philip's telling the truth. My name is Kolson. I'm from Sunnyvale. Literally just graduated last year. I think it's so cool even just getting to come back, because I remember the last time I was on this stage, it was Women's Appreciation 2020, like literally the week before everything shut down. And I was up on this stage with Isaac Doy and Jesse Chan, some fellow graduates, and we were doing some kind of song and dance that involved us all kind of like interweaving and dancing around each other. What we forgot to factor in was that the mics recorded. So as we danced and weaved around each other, I have two sisters, so what we did with the chords perfectly resembled like a hair braid with those three strands. So from that moment, I'm glad to be back here. Just finally up seeing each one of you guys. So you can go to the next slide. Okay, so for those that don't know me, I'm going to try my very best to sum up my time in Cal Poly in three little pictures. I'll just talk through each of them and what they represent. The first one on the right side is a picture of me, Edwin Chung, which is Evan's older brother, and Kristen. And that's a picture of us on a train on our vision trip to East Asia. And that kind of just symbolizes like all the great times that I've been able to have through Epic, not only relationally with other people in the community, but also all the cool service opportunities and ministry opportunities that Epic affords. Each one of you did not come to Epic by accident, and I really just found that was the case throughout my time here. The bottom left-hand side is a picture of me playing intramural basketball. For those of you who don't know, I'm a basketball junkie. I'm the type of guy to literally like be at the rec 24/7 in between every single class. After every single large group, they used to like go to the rec center, play until like midnight. That was totally my thing. And that's a picture of when we won the IM basketball championship with a full team. There's this one guy in the middle. He actually used to play at the University of Arizona. He literally like carried our entire team all the way to victory. Like honestly didn't even do too much. I just know how to recruit people. So that was a good time. And lastly, top left corner, that's represented in my time at CPAC, which is the Cal Poly Accounting Club. So thankfully, like by the grace of God, through CPAC, I was able to land a job over at Deloitte. That's where I'm working at today. So, okay, now you know what I did at Cal Poly. My pandemic experience. Okay. How about I go through the ones on the left first, and then I'll get to the one on the right. Bottom left-hand corner, because pandemic made a lot of classes easier, I had so much more free time on my hands, spent a lot of time rock climbing. David Yang in my grade was actually the rock climbing guru, so that's a picture of us and a few folks over at Pinnacles National Park, which is like kind of in between Bay Area and SLO. Beautiful rock formations. I would totally encourage you all to go there if you have the chance. That's a funny picture on the left-hand side, me with my CPA textbook. I spent so much time studying for those tests. For those that don't know, CPA stands for Certified Public Accountancy. Each test is 4 hours long and takes hundreds of hours for each test to study for. So I just took my last one on Saturday, and I'm a free man. So I don't know if it's sacrilegious, but I like walked out of that test singing like, "My chains are gone." It felt so good. And lastly, I proposed to my girlfriend Anna. Yeah. Yeah. I somehow coerced her into saying yes. So that's by the grace of God in and of itself. Funny enough, I actually got to meet Anna at Epic, form a relationship with her, and here we are going to get married next July. So for those of you that are sitting in here, maybe you're a fella and you're single, and you never know what God has in store for you is what I'm trying to say. The one might be in here. Just take heart and have courage, and don't be afraid to step up to the plate when the call comes. Ladies, for you too, don't be afraid to be bold. So, all right, on to the next slide. Okay, I feel like this is like the most common like icebreaker question is like, oh, what's your like quarantine like chef moment? Like, what's your proudest quarantine dish? So I'll share one with you guys. So my favorite restaurant in the Bay Area is Bonchon Chicken. It's like Korean fried chicken. Oh my goodness, so good. But because of the pandemic and everything was shut down, And like, I was obviously in slow. I didn't get to have bonchon chicken, so I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna bring bonchon chicken to my house and make it myself. So I got a recipe from somebody, and I learned how to make the most bomb, in my humble opinion, most bomb Korean fried chicken sandwich. So that's a picture of that right there. But the reason I bring this up is because I love food. In addition to basketball and other things, food is like a very big part of my life. And when I was thinking about what do I want to speak to, what do the people of Epic need to hear, I was reminded of a passage in Scripture that actually relates to feasting. And I feel like so many of us can relate to that. So I'm going to read from Matthew 22 today. The theme is reshape. So I'm going to talk about the parable of the feast in Matthew 22 in the lens of like how can we reshape our opinion of God, who God is, and more importantly, just reshape our view of the gospel. So I'm just going to be talking about it extremely simply, just from my experience. I'm going to be sharing a little bit along the way as well. So if you don't mind, I'm going to turn around and just read out the passage real quick. Matthew 22, the parable of the great feast. Jesus also told them other parables. He said, the kingdom of heaven can be illustrated by the story of a king who prepared a great wedding feast for his son. When the banquet was ready, he sent the servants to notify those who were invited, but they all refused to come. So he sent other servants to tell them, the feast has been prepared. The bulls and the fattened cattle have been killed, and everything is ready. Come to the banquet. But the guests he had invited ignored them and went on their own way, one to his farm, another to his business. Others seized his messengers and insulted them and killed them. The king was furious, and he sent out his army to destroy the murderers and burn their town. And he said to his servants, the wedding feast is ready, and the guests I invited aren't worthy of the honor. Now go to the street corners and invite everyone you see. So the servants brought in everyone they could find, good and bad alike, and the banquet hall was filled with guests. But when the king came in to meet the guests, he noticed a man who wasn't wearing the proper clothes for a wedding. Friend, he said, how is it that you are here without wedding clothes? But the man had no reply. Then the king said to his aides, bind his hands and feet and throw him into the outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. For many are called, but few are chosen. So I'm going to be talking about this passage in 3 different lenses. In each one, I'm going to give kind of a call to action that Jesus provides through this story. So if you can go to the next slide. It's very simple. Number 1, respond to the call. Number 2, put on your new clothes. Number 3, enjoy the feast. Okay, first one, respond to the call. What exactly does that mean? I think first to understand what that call exactly was, as we look back in the passage, the king was calling out to the people they invited, hey, come to the feast. Who is Jesus actually speaking to through this parable? And to do that, you need to look back into Matthew 21, because Jesus wasn't randomly just walking up to people and say, hey, let me tell you a story. He was actually talking to a group of people for a specific purpose. In this case, those people were the Jewish leaders and the teachers of the law. In Matthew 21, they originally walked up to Jesus, said, hey, Jesus, what are you doing here? By what authority do you have to say the things that you're saying? Keep in mind, the Pharisees and the teachers of the law were people that for all their lives had spent their entire lives following the law to a T, doing everything correctly. They came from prestigious background, and they were, for the most part, the cleanest people of society. And when they saw a common carpenter boy from Galilee come in and say, you know, I'm the Son of God, perform tremendous miracles and just do fantastic things during his ministry, they were very confused and they were very angry and said, yeah, by what authority do you do this thing? So Jesus actually tells this parable in response to that question. Jesus, in saying this parable from the most general perspective, he's basically responding by saying, do you think the kingdom of heaven is a meritocracy or a mercyocracy? He's saying to these people, hey, I know you think that you've been building up your spiritual resume, but have you actually come to the kingdom of heaven? So he talks about in these first 5 verses. You can just go back to the passage if you want to make it a little bit easier. It talks about a king who sends out a call to each person that he invites. Says, hey, the feast is ready. You have to keep in mind, though, here's the thing. Each person that he said the feast is ready to, He didn't just say it out of the blue. These were people who were originally RSVP'd. So I'm planning for a wedding, so RSVPs are very familiar to me. You say that you're going to come to the wedding when the king says, the feast is ready, you should come. But the problem was, the people that said that they were going to come via the RSVP did not actually come. And that's very interesting, because Jesus is essentially saying, Pharisees and teachers of the law, you're people that said that you would follow the Lord, but have you actually come to the kingdom? Many will hear the call to salvation, but few will actually come. I think something important that's important to draw a distinction as well is those of us that may be feeling God calling us towards something. Maybe he's just calling us to him for the very first time, or maybe as a mature Christian, maybe he's calling you towards something within your faith. And maybe you're feeling apprehensive, and maybe you're saying, I want to come, but I don't know if I can actually come. I just want to give you an encouragement that when Jesus calls, when God calls you towards something, whether you say yes or no, that's one thing. But make sure that you don't just say, wait. In Luke 14, it talks about this story from a different perspective. Same exact story, but I'm going to read off. It says, they all alike began to make excuses. The first one said, I've just bought a field, and I must go see it. Please excuse me. Another said, I've just bought 5 yoke of oxen, and I'm on my way to try them out. Please excuse me. Still another said, I just got married, so I can't come. It's very interesting because all these people kind of made excuses, kind of dilly-dallied, said like, I don't know if I can come now. Like, I don't know, I got a lot of things going on. And I feel like for me, myself as well, like I have so many great excuses, and you might have great excuses too. We all have an excuse to not come at all or to delay our coming to the kingdom of heaven. I think a good example is like, when somebody like invites you to like a dinner party or a hangout, you said like, I'll think about it. But you know deep down in your heart, you're not coming to that thing. Like we all beat around the bush. And I feel like we do that sometimes with God. We say, hey God, I'll think about it. I'll pray about it. You're calling me towards to sharing the gospel with my friend. I'm going to think about it. I'm not necessarily going to move right now. But here's the thing. If God is real and his call is genuine, it is of the utmost importance. If he's not real and his call is not genuine, then the call is of no importance at all. But there's no way that his call is worth delaying once you truly receive it. I think that's an important line that Jesus draws by these first 5 verses when he talks about RSVPing versus actually coming. Maybe you've never come to Christ, or maybe that you've said to Christ that you've come many years ago, but on the inside yet you haven't yet actually come. And I would encourage you to simply enter into his rest. But what does that actually look like? That leads us into the next point. The next point is put on your new clothes. It's one thing to come to Christ, but actually Jesus is saying through this story that the manner in which you come is super important as well. The most important part of this story when I read it, and the most confusing part, was the last, verse 11, 12, 13, 14, when it talks about the king came to see the guests, and he saw the one person that wasn't wearing any wedding clothes. Now, for example, if someone invited you to a wedding, would you show up in basketball shorts and a wife beater? Probably not the best idea. Like, you're welcome to come to my wedding in that way because I'm okay with it. But for the most part, if you show up to somebody's wedding wearing a wife beater, they're going to be like, dude, like, where did you learn, like, your manners? Like, you got to get out of here. And at first glance, this might be very confusing because when you look at this, it says, okay, if God is so merciful and so gracious to invite all the people, it talks about the king goes out and invites the beggars and the peasants and all the commoners, just random people out in the countryside into the feast. Why did this one person who wasn't wearing wedding clothes get kicked out? Doesn't that make Jesus seem like someone that's unmerciful, contradictory toward himself? And that was something that I had to deal with. I was like, what the heck? Like, I thought that we're supposed to be allowed to come just as we are. And I think that really underscores an important point. This is representative of the most common questions that a lot of us Christians have today. Can you come just as you are, or is it earned? Can I come to Jesus off of my own merits, or can I just completely walk up just exactly how I am? Actually, the answer is neither, and I'm going to explain to you a little bit why. If you look at this passage, you notice that there was only one person that wasn't dressed properly. And that leads to the question of, okay, so if the king went into the countryside and invited all these random people out to the wedding feast, how is it that all of these other ragamuffins, beggars, peasants, random people, how did they get to come, and how did they have their wedding clothes? They couldn't have possibly be prepared. The only logical explanation to that question is this answer. They came from wherever they came from, showed up to the door, but they were clothed by the king. They didn't have clothes on their own, but the king must have provided it for them at the door. And by whose expense, too, because there were, assumedly, a lot of these people in this parable were very poor, too. It must have been also at the king's great expense. I think this is such a beautiful, beautiful analogy, too, because it's really a beautiful picture into what the gospel is. The king just going out of his way at his greatest expense to provide us with a garment that makes us clean and perfect and able to enter the kingdom of heaven. Here's the thing, though. I think that a lot of us, myself included, often find ourselves clutching on, like this one guy, to our old garments and thinking that that will be enough to enter the kingdom of heaven. We're unwilling to get rid of our old rags, and we're unwilling to grab on to the new ones that are offered to us free of charge. Colossians 3:3 says, "For you died, and your life is now hidden with Christ in God." That's a beautiful illustration. When we walk into the wedding feast, the clothes that the king puts on us, the clothes that God puts on us, is the clothes of Christ. When God sees us, he sees Christ completely covering us. He doesn't see any of our old rags because we've cast them off. But so many of us think that we need to hold on to those things. I had a similar experience in my life where I thought that I could grab on to my old clothes. I thought that I could how do I say, just cling on to these things as I walk through my Christian life, and that would be good enough for God. So I was a person, many of you can relate. I grew up in the church. I was somebody that intellectually accepted Jesus as Lord, but I never got the chance to actually break free of my rags. And for me, as I grew up into junior high, something that really kind of threw me for a loop was my addiction to pornography. Isn't that scary? That sin is so great, and that sin is so great for two specific reasons. First one, because of my mindset, thinking that my sin distanced me from God, that every time I would have a good week, I would feel, oh my gosh, look at me, I'm so close to God, God loves me so much, and I feel like I've earned a spot at the feast. I would show up on Sundays, I would feel super good about myself. But on weeks that I didn't do as well, or where I stumbled, I felt like, oh my gosh, God just hates me so much. I don't know if I can even sit here in Sunday service and worship him just because I feel so distant. And I know it's one thing for me with my specific sin. For each one of you, you may either relate to me or relate on a similar level. Maybe you have something that you feel is distancing you from God, but it's distancing you for the reason of you don't realize that you can actually take that garment, you can throw it off in light of grace. The second negative ramification that I had for that growing up was I grew very skeptical and disillusioned in my Christian upbringing. I was like, what the heck? Why is there so many feasts out there? Islam has a feast, Buddhism has a feast. Everything has a value proposition of saying we have a feast, we have an afterlife. that you can come to? Like, what was so special about Christianity? And I grew disillusioned because I grew up in the church. I said, what's so special about Christianity? How am I so lucky that I was just so happy to be born into the correct religion? And that's because I didn't understand grace either on that aspect. You see, it took me a while to actually understand the true meaning of grace and the true meaning of actually throwing off my old clothes. And it took an experience with my father, who I love and is very dear to my heart, for me to realize that. So for whatever reason, I mustered up the conviction and said, I'm going to talk to my dad about this because I'm at my wit's end. I don't know how to deal with this. I feel so guilty. I feel so shameful. And like, maybe my dad can give me some advice. So we're driving to Starbucks one random day. I'm like, hey, Dad, I need to tell you something. Like, I've been dealing with this addiction, and it's been eating at me for so long. I don't know what to do. My dad loves the Lord. He pulls over to the side of the road. I'm like, oh, shoot. Like, this is not going to be good. This guy's going to lay this smack down on me. I'm like preparing for him to pull out the belt. But here's what he does. He turns around to me. He says, Kolson, I just want you to know something. I want you to know that no matter what you do, and no matter what you have done, there's nothing that you could do to ever make me love you less. And there's nothing that you could ever do to make me hate you on any single level. And I apologize if there's anything that I've done in my life to make you feel that way. And that was the moment for me. I was like, I finally understand what grace is. Like, you see, the beautiful thing about grace and the beautiful thing about mercy is that we don't have to hide behind all of the dirty garments that we have, and we don't have to try to scrub at them and try to make them as clean as possible, because they'll never be enough. Will never be enough. But in light of the gospel, in light of what Jesus has done, we can strip these things off, and we can know that we are 100% enough, not on our own merit, but upon the merits of Christ. Isn't that awesome? That's so awesome. Oh my goodness. That was so freeing for me. So I want you to ask yourself, what is the garment that you're holding on to? What's holding you back from putting on Jesus' garments at the wedding feast? Okay, now we've come to the feast. We have our garments. Lastly, let's enjoy the feast. Point number 3. Imagine what it must have been like for all these beggars and peasants that came to the feast. You must imagine these were people that were starving, they're hungry, just yearning for some food. They must have marveled at every single dish. Wow, look at that turkey leg. Whoa, look at that caviar. That must have been great for them. Oh my goodness, knowing full well that they don't deserve to be there. And I can imagine if the Pharisees had come to the feast, they would have had their noses turned up, being like, oh, like I've had way better stuff before. Like, what is all this? Like, this is terrible. And the reason I say this is because I think it's a good litmus test to gauging what our appreciation of the gospel is. 2 litmus tests that I want you guys to ask yourself right now. First one, ask yourself, am I astonished? Am I thrilled when I think about the mercy of God? Does it make my heart jump inside? Or is it just another thing where I'm just turning my nose up and it's like, oh, same old, same old? If you're feeling stale, if you're feeling like the mercy of God doesn't thrill you, I would suggest just dig a little bit deeper into what it is. Second thing, ask yourself, am I ashamed to share about my sin? Are my failures and are my mistakes a shame? Or has the gospel truly transformed them into treasures in the light of the gospel? So the difference for me in my story is prior to that conversation that I had with my father, that I was ashamed to share with others. I put up my walls at every single youth group that I went to. I was just unwilling to become vulnerable with my brothers and sisters in Christ. And here's why. Because I thought that those things would actually get me into the wedding feast. I thought that on those merits, that's how good of a Christian I am. But if we truly understand the mercy of Christ, that's why I'm up here sharing about my shortcomings, because the second I get to share about my shortcomings, that's the moment that God is magnified, and that my gratitude for what the gospel is is increased. So once again, to repeat the question, are we ashamed to share about our sins, or are we joyful to do so? Because in the process of sharing about our sins, Christ's glory is magnified because he takes those things and he transforms them into something beautiful. So, those are my 3 points. Just talking about Parable of the Great Feast. I hope you got to take away something unique from this story. So in a second, we're going to be turning it over to discussion groups. So feel free to get into groups of 2 or 3. I think I did a typo on the questions. Number 3, I feel really embarrassed about it. I think, does the gospel truly feel like good news? Like, come on, Kolson. Didn't you take your SAT prep courses? But in a second, we're going to turn over and we're going to just go through these questions, kind of following along with my 3 points. One thing I want to leave you off on is this precursor, I guess. I was listening to this sermon by Timothy Keller, and he talks about this story that really beautifully wraps up what exactly the good news is. He talks about in the story this guy named Murdo MacDonald, who was a Scottish minister that served as a chaplain in World War II. You see, Murdo was captured and held in a prisoner of war camp in Nazi Germany prior to the war's end. And if you guys don't know, being a prisoner of war in Nazi Germany is a horrible experience. The guards treated them horribly. They barely got any food. They were probably cold and skin and bone. It was a terrible time. But here's the thing. When Murdo MacDonald, who was a Scottish minister, he was staying in this POW camp, somebody else in his bunk actually had a radio that they could hear news from the war front. So every once in a while, they would get little updates. They would hide the radio because they were not allowed to have it. So they would hear little news. And here's the thing. Also, on the other side of the camp, there was a bunch of Americans, but the British